The Capitals' hot stove is heating up.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holney. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. I would love to talk Capitals hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, the Capitals hot stove heats up, and the rumor mill is swirling round and round and round when it comes to the Capitals players that could potentially be on the move. We'll talk about that in the show. A little bit later, we will talk about how all eyes are on Nic Dowd and where he could potentially land at the trade deadline, if not before. A little bit later, we will talk about how there is increasing interest in Anthony Mantha and where he could land. But just to get it going here, what to make of the Capitals? It's a tough thing to try to determine. Are they in it? Are they out of it? It's like a pendulum that swings back and forth and back and forth. From one game to the next. I mean, you take a look at the Capitals against the Senators, and you're like, this team is built for bigger and better things. Okay, 24 hours later, facepalm against the Red Wings. So it's hard to determine what this team is made of, and it's becoming actually, I think, a little bit more clear that maybe potentially they're not made for the playoffs this year. I'm not ruling it out. Don't get me wrong, but it's just the inconsistent play. I'm, basing it on that. And then just how much runway is ahead of the Capitals. There's only so much time for them to really kick it into high gear as they are taking on the Flyers on Friday, who just are coming off a big win against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So a lot will be determined on Friday against the Flyers if they are, in fact, trending in the right direction, or does it seem more apparent that they will be sellers? And just, it's a hard thing. Are the Capitals out of it? If you're an everydayer of the show, my opinion has swung like a pendulum. As of Wednesday, the Caps are fifth in the Metro, 6 points back of the Philadelphia Flyers for third, and 6 behind the Tampa Bay Lightning for the last wild card spot in the conference. So it is not going to be an easy thing for the Capitals to make it to the playoffs. And, this time of year, I spend a lot of time listening to a lot of the insiders. I listen to Frank Saravalli. I listen to Elliot Freeman, all the big ones that are out there. And I was listening to Frank today on the Daily Faceoff, and he said, I never really considered the Capitals contenders this year. He said, they turned it on like the last 10 games here or so, but I don't really see them making it to the playoffs or anything grander than that. So the guys that know the sport the best don't see the Capitals at having a chance of making it to the playoffs. And I'm not saying that, you can take everything that they say right to the bank and that they're never wrong. I'm just saying that that is what those guys do for a living. And a lot of the premier insiders have held that opinion throughout the season. I think that to a certain extent, the last 10 games or so here have kind of said, well, maybe, but then all of a sudden you see them fall flat on their face. There hasn't been that spark that's led to a bigger fire. It's like a small fire that never fans into something larger. That is what the Capitals need, and that is something that has eluded them thus far this season. I think the Capitals fans, myself included, are so desperate for a big win. We're so desperate for a winning streak that when they even win a big by a convincing fashion, we're like, yep, they're back in it. They're back in it. And then, you take a look at the game like the one against the Red Wings, and everything comes crashing back down to reality. Their play as of late makes you wonder if this aging team, peppered with some young talent in Hershey, have what it takes to stand up to some of the best in the NHL. Okay, you beat the Senators. Okay, that's not saying a whole lot. I mean, I know that the Senators, they have kind of had an up and down season, primarily down season, but they've kind of come on strong somewhat in the last few games. But now they're also trending in the wrong direction. So it's easy to ride the highs and the lows, but it's starting to come into focus what kind of team this is. The Caps are playing really well, but certain things make me question the sustainability. This team has to make a push. You look at a horrible loss to the Red Wings and the Flyers turning on the Jets, and it makes you wonder if this team is for real or is it just a mirage? That's the thing. Do they have what it takes? And Frank Saravalli on the Daily Faceoff said the math, I know they have games in hand, but the math is still pretty daunting. The Flyers win again on Tuesday. Washington's 6 points back with 2 games in hand over the Flyers. That's really the team they're chasing. I guess you can add in the Lightning too. Again, to say that the magnitude of the game on Friday is significant would be an understatement. The Capitals, and I know I hate to say these words, must win game. They just really should win this game because, again, I hate using must win because then when it's a must win and they lose, then really was it a must? It's quite frustrating. The Capitals need to win on Friday. Make no mistake about it. The math gets fuzzy for a Caps team that has been really trying to make a push heading into the deadline so that Brian McClellan is not a seller at the deadline. But they've got some interesting pieces. They've got pieces to move if they're not an authentic playoff team. I haven't considered the Caps in that category all year, writes Frank Saravalli. So that is one of the premier insiders. Frank knows the game very well, and that's his thoughts. I've heard the same thing from Elliot Freeman and Jeff Merrick and all the other insiders, Darren Dreger, all of them, that none of them really had the Capitals pegged as being contenders, making it to the playoffs. And furthermore, a lot of the Capitals beat writers themselves, some of them employed by the Capitals themselves, they don't even see the Capitals as contenders this year. And if you are someone that covers the team and they're cutting your check and you still have question marks, then is there really hope? And, again, it's not the above all end all that a Capitals insider wrote them off or that Frank Saravalli or Elliot Freeman did. It's just that they know the game really well. That is what they do for a living. So you're asking me, as a guy that hosts a show on the Capitals, what is my thought on it? Because this is Locked On Capitals at the end of the day, and I host this show. I hold that position. Friday will determine my opinion on which way this team goes. And there have been points of this here as of late. You take a look at the Capitals on that lengthy road trip when they were playing the Avalanche and the Minnesota Wild. That was supposed to be the litmus test, and they failed that test horribly. But there was still a chance because they kind of turned on the Jets a little bit after that, but it wasn't sustainable. The Capitals have not had that lengthy winning streak that some of the better teams in the NHL have had. That is something that you need to have sustainable victory. Because even if the Capitals find a way to back into victory, say they eke into a playoff spot, if they just have the door slammed in their face right away, I don't know. Is that a good feeling to be eliminated in the first round? I know that the Capitals didn't make it to the playoffs last season. And what will that ultimately mean if they miss the playoffs in back-to-back seasons? Do I think Spencer Carberry's no? Good Lord, I hope not. I don't put the onus of this on Spencer Carberry. I don't absolve him of all guilt. But it is a team that is disjointed at the end of the day. And I think that they're missing some pieces. And I think there's a lot of things to consider. And I think that Brian McClellan is searching his heart of hearts on what to do with some of these guys. I'm talking Anthony Mantha and Nic Dowd. Are the Capitals better minus Anthony Mantha? Are the Capitals better minus Nic Dowd or Charlie Lindgren? Or are they just digging themselves a deeper hole? It's a tough question. And what kind of return? That is of paramount importance, and that is something I will talk about in the following segments. But I would say tread lightly. Don't do the things that the insiders tell you to do. Well, Frank Saravalli and this guy said that I should trade Nic Dowd or Anthony Mantha. You got to think to a certain extent that Brian McClellan doesn't live in a bubble. He listens to these insiders. And, does he put any weight into any of those insiders? I don't know. But, the thing of it is don't make a move because people are telling you to make a move. Are the Capitals going to be better minus Anthony Mantha, considering he's one of the biggest contributors on this team? It's a tough question. What kind of return? Nic Dowd, how are you going to get a return for Nic Dowd better than Nic Dowd? He's considered one of the best defensive centers in the entire National Hockey League. Those guys don't grow on trees. And we're talking about draft picks and futures. Oh God, I've seen this movie before. It's called The Washington Nationals. And if you think it's tough watching the Capitals now, wait till they wander out in the wilderness for 2 or 3 more years. So I'm just going to say tread lightly, take your time, Brian McClellan, and let's make wise decisions. If there's a good deal to be made, let's make it. But, looking historically, Anthony Mantha has played well here as of late. But when you look at what the Capitals gave up to get Anthony Mantha, was it worth it? Big draft picks. Was that the right thing to do? Then also, you take a look at other moves. I was recently posted a thing on Twitter about Shattenkirk and all the draft picks that the Capitals gave up for that. It's a tough position for the Capitals to be in. That, they've constantly been kicking that can down the road, and it's never come home to roost. So it's a tough position for the Capitals to be in. I'm not saying that I don't want them to trade Anthony Mantha or Nic Dowd. It's just make sure that it's an upgrade and that it's going to help the Capitals and not the too distant future. I know the draft picks, especially when we're talking Ryan Leonard and Crystal and all those, they're, I don't know. I guess there's something crazy that could happen and Leonard could join the team next year, but, he could still be a year or 2 away. So I don't want this team to just, kind of wander in the wilderness for years trying to get in contention. I want it to come together a little bit quicker than that. And that's my want. And I'm just a host of a podcast on the Capitals, but I think as Capitals fans, that's what you want as well. So to wrap up this segment, I'm going to say tread lightly, really think about what you're doing. The Capitals have the advantage in this situation, especially when it comes to Charlie Lindgren. There's a whole lot of different, teams out there that are looking for a guy like Charlie Lindgren or an Anthony Mantha, that to take your time out there. You don't need to rush into a decision. So that's the big thing here, is if it's an upgrade, I'm all in it. If it's not an upgrade, maybe pump the brakes and reassess in the offseason. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about how Anthony Mantha had increased interest around the National Hockey League, that this guy just last summer that was kind of discarded and said, hey, whatever it takes, just get him out of here. All of a sudden looks like he is a pretty key piece and a piece that a lot of other teams would have. Who are those teams? I'll discuss coming up. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all in prices and views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes guesswork out of buying tickets. And let me tell you one thing that's frustrating is that when my favorite concert comes to town, or my favorite sports team or band is playing and I can't find tickets, it's frustrating. I go to all the different apps. Forget all those. You don't need those apps. What you need is Game Time, and take the guesswork out of it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Anthony Mantha is an interesting guy. If we rewind time and we remember what it took to get him here, it was draft picks and Richard Panik, and it was they had to move heaven and earth to get him to come to this team. So when you take a look at it, was the right thing to do? Well, up until this season, it seemed like one of the poor decisions that the Capitals GM has made thus far. But it's interesting how playing well erases a lot of bad things that happened. And taking a look at it, his play as of late is quite impressive. Defying odds. Generally, do you go from one of your worst seasons to your best season on the team you're currently played on? But Anthony Mantha is doing just that, defying odds. And he's doing it because, let's kind of just, rehash what he did. He hired that mental coach because last season he was snake bitten. He was caught up in his own head. He couldn't score a goal to save his life. And in the off season, he dropped 10 pounds, and he even came into this season a little bit slow. But then all of a sudden a light went on and he started scoring. And what was it? It's just that he started scoring goals, and that's positivity. That's confidence. And that is projecting success, which I talk about quite often on the show. You saw the same thing with Alex Ovechkin. So now he's really turned it on, and its interesting position is that he is going to be an unrestricted free agent this summer. What do the Capitals do? Can they actually get someone better for Anthony Mantha? That is the question. Again, I also think that they may need to bundle players in order to get the upgrade that you're looking for. Again, what kind of return is Nic Dowd going to get? I will talk about that in this third segment. But the Capitals, Anthony Mantha has been a name circulating out there amongst some of the premier insiders. Let's talk about Anthony Mantha. This season, 18 goals and 14 assists for 32 points in 54 games. Mantha, 29, is in the final year of a 4-year, $22.8 million contract. He does not own any no trade protection and is earning $6.5 million in actual salary this season. So taking a look at it, the question is do the Capitals have plans for him after this season? If not, then get something instead of nothing, because if he makes it to free agency, the Capitals get a nothing. So they need to do something. So Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick of the 32 Thoughts podcast, was talking on the 6 Degrees of Chris Chelios episode on Washington Capitals pending UFA Anthony Mantha and how he's playing well, increasing his trade value. Merrick says, we did himself a lot of good this weekend when it comes to the trade deadline, maybe finding a new home, maybe establishing and getting a foothold somewhere else. And I don't know about being this year's version of Ivan Barbashev, but Anthony Mantha of the Washington Capitals, and Anthony Mantha is having a real good season. He's scoring goals this year, and he was able to do what a lot of people only dreamed of, that they'd be able to, and that is fight Nick Cousins. You don't think that got that got noticed around the NHL on Sunday? Elliot Friedman says, I'm sure it did. No question about it. Washington's been trying to trade Mantha for a long time, but now he's coming down to the time where he's a UFA and the salary isn't as much anymore. So that is why the Capitals are looking to move him. I think that, we look at how the production that he's had this season, but then if we flip over his hockey card and look at previous seasons, we're like, okay, you played good this year, but is it sustainable in coming years? So where would Anthony Mantha be a good fit? He would be a good rental on a team for a team that is poised to make a push. He's gotten hot at the right time, and there's going to be someone who's going to say, we're going to take a chance because he's playing for his next deal, and he'll be highly motivated to play for his next deal. I have no doubt that's the case, Elliot Friedman says. So it's an interesting thing. Jeff Merrick went on to say, teams are looking for a left winger, and maybe the team that is looking at Jake Gensel. And there's a lot of teams that are looking for Jake Gensel as well. So it is an interesting position. And they're talking about Anthony Mantha as potentially, if you're not going to get Jake Gensel, maybe get Anthony Mantha, that type of thing. So it is an interesting thing that, you take a look at Anthony Mantha. Historically on the Capitals, hasn't necessarily killed it. You know what I'm talking about. But this year he has. So it's a difficult thing for Brian McClellan to know what to do. Is his winning sustainable? Do the Capitals do something crazy and try to bring Anthony Mantha back to a new contract? Would I do it? Would Dan do that? I probably wouldn't. And, unless, he was willing to take a discount, I'm not so sure, but it's a difficult thing because, again, I'm going to put this squarely on what kind of return are they going to get. And I know that Brian McClellan is no stranger to being a GM, so he's not going to make too foolish of a decision. I hope he's not going to be. Not something like Philip Forsberg. Oh, wait a minute. That was the previous GM. But you know what I'm talking about here. Make a wise decision and take a look at Anthony Mantha. I do think that he will be on the move because the Capitals will be tantalized with a first-round pick or some NHL ready talent, something similar to potentially like Rasmus Sandin. But I don't necessarily think that Anthony Mantha is going to fetch that alone. I think that it's going to be a bundle deal. And that at the end of the day, I think that Anthony Mantha will be on the move on the deadline, if not before. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about how all eyes are on Nic Dowd. This is a player that's been spoke of for over a year, that a lot of teams that, maybe aren't that familiar with a guy that's on the fourth line playing in Washington, all of a sudden they're a whole lot more interested. Why are they interested? And what are some landing spots for him? I'll discuss coming up. We're past the halfway point of the season. Let's face it, Capitals fans, it's been a bumpy ride. Regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. And let me tell you something, guys. I was not the kind of guy that was that big fantasy sports, but once I found Sleeper, let me tell you something. I love it. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Capitals fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Nic Dowd is an interesting guy. If you are not familiar, with hockey, say you were just, on the outside and looking in and taking a look at the Capitals and taking a look at the NHL, and you're like, what is all the interest with Nic Dowd? Well, where does he play? Is he like a top line winger, a top line center? He's a fourth line center. What is all the fuss about with Nic Dowd? Well, there's quite a bit of fuss. And I'm going to go ahead and say that, when you talk about a fourth line, it's a title at the end of the day. And I think that, Nic Dowd could play on a top 6 line somewhere in the NHL. It's just where he has played the best. So that is what a lot of teams are looking for. He is huge. On playing in different roles on the team. We've seen him on the PK. We've seen him in different roles. He is one of the better defensive centers in the league. So that is why a lot of teams are ultimately interested in Nic Dowd. Sportsnet Elliot Freeman joined Bob Stauffer on 6:30 Ched's Oiler Now to discuss the Oilers' approach to the trade deadline. The Oilers are very much interested in Nic Dowd. I do think Nic Dowd is on your radar. Do you look at Mantha? What price are you willing to pay? What are you going to decide is your biggest need? Friedman said on the show, adding, I do think they're looking at Dowd. I think he's someone you guys have considered. With Mantha, there's a limit to the price you're willing to pay. Dowd is very much on your radar. Again, Elliot Freeman, of course, the premier insider, the Adam Schefter, if you will, of the NHL. But what do we know about Dowd? What kind of adds a little bit of a wrinkle to the plan is that Nic Dowd is currently injured. What is the significance of his injury? We know that he's day-to-day. But, what kind of injury is he going to face? That is going to limit what kind of return the Capitals get. So Dowd is day-to-day with an upper body injury. It's a bargain deal, 1 year left at $1.3 million. And taking a look at Dowd this season, Dowd has 8 goals and 8 assists, one of the best defensive centers in the league. And on the Caps, he leads the team in defensive zone draws and huge on the PK. So that's what teams are looking at there. They know what they're getting and they like it. It's a cheap deal, and he's one hell of a player. And what would the Edmonton Oilers have to trade? And Edmonton is an interesting team. It seems like everyone projects them to do really great things every season. And sometimes they make it to the playoffs, but net minding oftentimes has been one of their bugaboos. I would also not be too surprised if a team like the Oilers would be seeking out Charlie Lindgren services as well. So what would the Edmonton Oilers have to give up? They have a 2024 first rounder. The Oilers also have a second rounder, fifth rounder, and 2 sixth rounders in 2024, and first round picks for the next 2 years, not to mention some prospects in the organization. So that's what you're looking at as a return, not the kind of thing that, makes me feel like that's going to fix the Capitals next season. That to me seems like that is something that is going to fix the Capitals in years to come. So it's an interesting thing for the Capitals if that's what they're looking for. Are they looking for prospects? If you're getting prospects, they're not necessarily going to be, or draft picks for that matter, generally won't be ready to help the team in the short term. That is more mid to long term solution. So a tough thing, I think that, but that is what the Capitals are looking at if they are in fact going to be sellers. And it is, inching more and more in that direction unless they pull a real rabbit out of their hat and pick up a big win on Friday. Again, I don't want to dismiss them. I want to hold on to hope, thinking that they're, maybe they can do it. Because if you're a fan of the team at the end of the day, you want to believe that your team is able to do it. But if in fact they aren't able to, I think that you're going to see a similar move to what they did last year. If we remember, Hathaway and Orlov went out to Boston. They got a draft pick. That draft pick went up to Toronto. That's how they got Rasmus Sandin. That was a key for the present and the future on the blue line. If there's something similar that the Capitals could do, except a forward this year, I think that would be a good thing to do. And then they're going to have, things that they're going to have to do in the offseason. They're going to have to assess some of this young talent that we've seen. Is what are they going to do with Hendrix Lapierre? Is Pierre Dubé good, or is he just a mirage? You're taking a look at Ethan Frank. Is Ethan Bear what you guys thought he was going to be? Remember Ethan Bear coming here? He was going to be the Caps' long-term solution on the blue line. Haven't seen a whole lot of evidence of that thus far. So it could be, some, tough games and maybe some tough seasons ahead for the Capitals, as they could be parting with some players that, are key contributors. You think the Capitals are in rough position now. Say they are minus Mantha. Say they are minus Dowd. Say they are minus Charlie Lindgren. Do you think the Capitals are going to be better right out of the gates next season? If you do, I want to have what you're having, because you are obviously drinking some sort of concoction with optimism in it. I don't think that is going to be the case. I think that, if you take a look at the Nationals, and I point to them because that is a team that truly had a tear it down to the studs, rebuild, everything must go. And they're, few years removed from that right now, and they're still not in it. They're still not expected to do good this season. And that was with them moving out some key players. So it's going to not, if you think that this is going to be something that's going to fix the team in the short term, that's generally not the way it goes. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully they can, use some strategic moves here, and they can, help this team. And it's not going to be something that's going to take years and years to get this team back into contention, because I don't think that DC needs yet another team that's in a rebuild and yet not in contention. That is not going to help their overall plans of, filling up Capital One Arena or wherever they happen to be playing in Virginia in years to come. They need to have a competitive team out on the ice for a couple different reasons, so that fans want to go for number one, and number two, that, we make the most of the Alex Ovechkin era. I mean, that factors into this a bit as well. And I know the promises that were made to Alex Ovechkin that he wouldn't be on a tear down to the studs rebuild, and that he wants to play on a competitive team. Is this team right now as is competitive? Or should we do something that would help facilitate Alex Ovechkin in catching Wayne Gretzky and ultimately the Capitals winning another Stanley Cup? Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. A lot of hot stove talk, but why is that? Well, for one, there's no Capitals game tonight. And number two, it is coming up, the trade deadline on March 8th. The Capitals could be very, very busy. Listen, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are ultimately what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.